Okay, good morning, folks. Welcome to the Grow Finish Biosecurity Breakout. I'm Paul Sundberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Swine Health Information Center. And they had to have a breakout session in here yesterday, but I'm going to tell you probably the same thing they told you yesterday. This ain't church. Come on up so you can see what's going on. If you would, please. We're going to get started, and one thing that I'll tell you, as you go through and listen to these, Swine Health Information Center's got a pretty big program with the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research and National Pork Board and Wean-to-Harvest Biosecurity. We've got priorities that are advertised on the swinehealth.org website, and we're always looking for good ideas. So as you listen to these folks, be thinking of good ideas about how you might be able to help with moving the needle on wean-to-harvest biosecurity. The first speaker today, first person up, is Adam Schelkopf. He's with Pipestone Veterinary Services, University of Illinois, 2012, and he's the health director for their management company. He lives in Chicago with his wife and son, so he travels a lot, and he's going to be our first one talking about assessing and benchmarking practices. Okay, Adam?
Is this on? All right. Well, thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and thank you guys for all being here today. I'm going to talk about a little bit about a project here that we started on just shy of a year ago. Looking at wean-to-market biosecurity, and it follows on the theme that many have talked about here through the conference and over the past years, that we have an opportunity in the industry to improve wean-to-market biosecurity standards. And so I'll go into a little bit of detail about why we embarked on this project and a little bit of just the progress update on where we're at today. So the title is Wean-to-Market Biosecurity Standards, creating, assessing towards, and benchmarking within a given standard for wean-to-market practices. As an industry, I think it's very clear that we have tremendous opportunity to gain. I borrowed this slide from Gordon, who gave a presentation at the US SHIP here recently, just looking at this is actually birth-to-market mortality. This is 2021 data from Holtkamp and others, looking at different countries. What is the birth-to-market mortality? And honestly, it's pretty tough to look at this slide and find the US on the far left side of this with the worst birth-to-market mortality. So I don't think I need to belabor the point that we have tremendous opportunity to gain when we look relative to our peers. And this was a challenge by Gordon that the US needs to be the best in the world. And this was one of the introductions. And I think we can certainly do that. The other point, obviously, then, is we have everything to lose. We've spent a lot of time talking about PRRS virus and the 144 strains and the challenges we face today. We have made great strides as an industry to advance our science on disease eliminations at the sow farm level. And then we lack on the wean-to-market phase and the ability to keep pigs at a high health status because of some of the practices that we employ every day. And then obviously, I don't need to belabor the point on the right there, but ASF, we have everything to lose when we think of the drastic risk that we would have to the United States and to our trade if a foreign animal disease were to enter the US. Randy did a great job yesterday talking about the trajectory of exports and what it means to our industry. And so I really do believe we have everything to lose by not being proactive on wean-to-market biosecurity. As I was telling Paul, I'm 11 years in practice now. PED, we actually marked our 10-year on PED introduction to the United States. And why do I bring this up? In the early onset of this disease, we certainly recognize disease moving site to site, but what you really look when you have to study that curve and say we infected 40% of the herds in less than 1 year's time, we don't have a handle on the speed at which things move between site to site, producer to producer. And so this just needs to be a wake-up call for what we need to do to improve and prevent the spread of something that in its early onset we don't know what the disease is or how it's being transmitted. So that was just a little bit of background of why are we focusing on this wean-to-market? And why do we not, as an industry, really have wean-to-market biosecurity standards? That's the point I'm going to make today, is we don't have a good set of standards. This is a quote that I took from the ISO, International Organization for Standardization. I like it because it's really eloquent as it defines what truly a standard is for Wean-to-market biosecurity. Standards are the distilled wisdom of people with expertise in their subject matter and who know the needs of the organizations they represent. It's so eloquent, I think, because people in this room and in the hallways, really the people with the expertise, they know the needs. We all know the needs of the industry. We need to step up and define this standard. Think of them as the formula that describes the best way of doing something. If we know the formula for the best way to do something, why wouldn't we do it? And then much of the fuel for this project was, as we've hammered on sow farm biosecurity here over decades, we truly think that today, hey, we have a set of standards across the industry for biosecurity practices on the sow farm. We may not all do the exact same processes, but we know the key points of disease entry. We know the key points of transmission. And so we have processes set up in all the key areas to try and protect sow farm biosecurity. So animal entry, and I'll go just through a couple of these, but right, we know a health history, we have quarantine, we have testing. The point that I think Kim made on vehicles. We wash, we disinfect, we have dedicated vehicles and wash bays for a sow farm. Personnel, we limit entry, we shower in, or we may have Danish, but we have a lot of processes put in place at the sow farm level. We have a set standard as an industry. And then two of the more recent ones I would even say is air and feed. So not every sow farm is going to be able to move necessarily away from pig dense areas, but there are efforts, whether it's through filtration or relocation or control of pigs around an area to help control. And then feed. We've learned about the ability for virus to be transmitted in feed. And so using health pyramids, using mill and feed ingredient biosecurity are new ways that we add to the standard for what we employ on a sow farm. What is the value? This is a question. We had a meeting here a couple years ago. And I'm going to say there are 400 or 500 farmers in the room. We asked, do you think there's a return on investment for improving wean-to-market biosecurity standards? Actually shocking to me, 90% of producers answered in that they believe there's a return on investment. Right? You could look around the room, all the producers that you know are not changing their boots, not changing all of the things that we're going to hammer on, but yet 90% would raise their hand and say, there is a return on investment, I'm just not doing it. So, why do we not have standards? The knowledge and the science is extensive and clear. The return on investment can be substantial. The precedence and the expectation has been set at the sow farm level to adhere to a set of standards. So just why as an industry do we not get better? So now I'm going to go a little bit into the project goal here for what this project was. There were 5 key objectives with the project. Number 1, define a set standard for wean-to-market practices. Let's just start down the pathway of defining a standard. And then let's establish a tool that can be used to assess practices towards this standard. Ultimately, the goal of compiling the data into a benchmark to display compliance with the standard and a reference towards peers for producers. Measure progress over time of individual producers and on subsequent assessments. Can we make progress if we put this in place? And then honestly, for me, the holy grail of this one, can we compare to disease surveillance, look at disease incidence, look at economics from biological performance relative to scoring on a wean-to-market biosecurity standard? That's part of the one. We all raise our hand, or that group of individuals raise their hand, there's an economic return, but what is that economic return? Is it worth putting X, Y, and Z practices in place? Somehow there's a disconnect because we're not making the advancements that we need. So a long-range vision or goal for this project that I wish I had that information today. We're not there yet quite. So define the standard, 10 major categories. So, and I'm going to show the standard next that we use, but the assessment tool has 10 major categories. And the goal of this, and it took a lot of deliberation to get something that we felt was applicable to all sites. It was inclusive to sites. The problem in going through an assessment, if there is roadblocks along the way, then a lot of times we can derail and not continue down the pathway. So it needed to be inclusive to all sites and practices. And then it utilized tiers to encompass the different layers of practices towards the highest level of a standard or towards the lower side of a standard. One that certainly gets debated, and you'll see why. All the practices and categories are equally weighted. This is one that I know we will refine at some point. Is the location amongst 50,000 finishing spaces more influential than if I change my boots or not? I don't know. I ask everybody in this room, everybody's gonna have a different opinion on which one is more weighted in influencing biosecurity. But today we started with just say, everything is equally weighted because A, we can't agree on necessarily which is more important, and B, I don't think we need to convey that, well, this one's more important, so do that, but don't do this one. So that's the way we've left it today. And then really perfection is not the goal. This is a tool to educate and hopefully drive progress. So this is what the standard and the assessment looks like, and the next two slides will break it down so those in the back can see it a little bit better. But what you have on the left is the 10 major biosecurity categories that we identified and then a couple subcategories within there. And then ranking across the top is just very simple. High risk behaviors, medium risk behaviors, and low risk behaviors. Very simple in its design, but intended to try and capture from the best to obviously needs a lot of opportunity on what those practices being employed are. And so the tool here, I took the top 5 and the bottom 5 here on the next slide so you can see in a little more detail, and I'll go through a few of these here, but your high risk earns 0 points, your medium risk earns 1, your low risk behaviors earn 2 points. It's a total of 38. It's very simple. The goal is not to achieve 38 on this. Again, if you think of the context relative to what we employ on a sow farm for standards, we're not going to have necessarily air filtration and all of the standards within Wean-to-market site. So the goal is not to achieve perfection in this one, but it is to be able to benchmark where are we at relative to that side of a standard. So location, Wean-to-market density within 3 miles, and then regional pig source diversity. So how many sites are within a given radius and how many sources of sites were in a given radius. Kind of back to Kim's point, right? If we're putting multiple strains, multiple sources in a region, I have higher risk. The animal entry, the sow farm status coming into the site does play a difference. And so we use a color-coded scheme for red, green, and blue that looks at different viruses and bacteria for classifying sow farm. But that indicates what that pig status is coming in. Single age sites. Are sites all in, all out by site? And then how many ages are on a site? Feed biosecurity, do I have mill biosecurity assessment? Do I have feed biosecurity? And then do I have transport biosecurity? So you can see the subcategorization of each of these key major points. Animal transport, are trucks and trailers washed and disinfected? High risk is none, medium risk is some of the time, and then low risk is obviously all trucks are washed and disinfected. And then for the truck wash, do I have biosecurity? Nothing, yes, I audit the wash, or I have controlled, dedicated, audited wash. So you can see how this is broken down. As I go to the last 5 here, mortality, supply entry, personnel, site sanitation, and training auditing are the last 5 categories. Mortality management, what's the removal process, and then disposal, on-site rendering, off-site rendering or communal disposal, or dedicated on-site compost. So you can see how this is broken down. And then the last one I'll just highlight here, the biosecurity management. Do I have anything? Do I have at least a training program? Or do I have a training program and an audit? Parallel that with what we've done on sow farm in many scenarios, and I think we've made great advancements. Many, many sow farms out there have really good training programs and then an auditing program to help validate that. So here is the data as we get towards the end. So what you can see today, and again, we've been auditing or assessing, I'm gonna say 4 months, something like that, 5 months. A total of 75 enterprises are represented here, which would be 381 actual pig sites. So this is done at the site level. We, in our initial wave, did a couple at an enterprise level, trying to understand and lump sites into an enterprise level. That became complicated. It really needs to be down to the site level. So we have 381 sites represented in here. Again, the maximum score being 38. And as I alluded to, the average score is 19. Perfection is not the goal. We definitely have opportunity to improve. 75th percentile is 22, and then the 25th is 16. The lowest score everyone always asks, I think, is a 6. That was actually one of my producers, not really proud of that one, but I'll talk a little bit more about that one because it does get to this point of how do we handle the conversation when you're the one that scored a 6? A couple points that I'll just highlight on the data, which are interesting to me. If you get down to the left and aggregate everything, it breaks down about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. About 1/3 of the responses, 1/3 of the practices are in the high risk category. 1/3 fall in the medium, 1/3 fall in the low risk category. So interesting how that breakout, I think, rolls up on the left side. And then if we take some of these individual ones, and everybody gets intrigued by which of the categories they look at and which ones stand out to them. But for me, the location, and again, this gets just to the point of, I'm not gonna necessarily move all of my wean-to-market barns, but I just need to acknowledge that that may be a risk in how I think about the biosecurity of my wean-to-market sites. So location, 49% of the responses would have been high risk. I have multiple sites of pigs within 3 miles, and I have multiple sources of pigs within that geographical location. Single age sites, this one's actually one that astounded me. 86% of the sites acknowledge that they're all in, all out by site, and only one age on the site. That one is actually very impressive for me, and I think if you wound the clock back or the calendar back in time, that wouldn't have been the same. So I think we've made nice advancements on getting all in, all out by site, because we recognize the health detriment if it's not the case. And also, we've just, as an industry, we've made advancements in the size of the sow farm that fits the wean-to-market site. And so this one actually tells a nice story for the industry. Animal transport, 23% of the responses would have been no wash, no sanitation, and no audit on truck washes, no dedication. To me, again, glaring opportunity. And then the supply entries, the other one, 63% have absolutely no process for getting supplies into a site. Most of us would not even think of having that level of entry into a sow farm, right? Just walk something right across. So no disinfection, no process for supplies, and sites or supplies brought from other hog sites. You can imagine what it looks like in practice. I take the sort board and the rattle paddle from the last site I marked, and I take the needle and syringe because I got a few pigs that I need to treat in this one, and you can play out the story from there. So it definitely highlights these areas that we need to focus on. And again, that one goes to this point of education. In the producer that I had that scored that lovely score of 6, that was one of the ones that was highlighted. Is they're a family that has multiple sites, multiple sources, but that's part of the routine every day. I chore these 8 barns in this manner. The market hogs are last, and I'll take the sort board and whatever it is from this site to this site to this site. I have a common tote that I have all of my medicine and my syringes and whatever it is, without thinking that, hey, the health status may be different between these sites. So it's a system that was designed for efficiency, but you can see how it contradicts with what we need to do from a biosecurity management standpoint. And then the last one here I'll highlight, the training and auditing. And I think this dovetails a little bit with Jean-Pierre's talk. 13% have no training, no auditing, no further education. And then the medium risk, which is I think 60% or something like that, they would at least have a training platform. They would have some method of training, whether that's PQA or whatever that training method is. But it, I think, highlights that there's definitely opportunity for us to improve. And this assessment tool actually helps, because when we start down the path of education and start to delve into the reasons why practices are employed in the way they are, you start to recognize the gaps that exist in the education. That we may have started down a pathway and put a few of the pieces of information in place, but we didn't connect the dots all the way till the end. And so this honestly serves as a nice tool to help in the education component. Okay, so just a little bit more on how does this actually get rolled out in the field? So the assessment is done, historically it's been done by the veterinarians at Pipestone, and individuals have been trained to assess to the standard and make sure that we have high data integrity. It always involves a conversation at the kitchen table or whatever it is with the staff and with the owners to make sure that the data in here is presented not confrontationally, not to degrade what's actually happening, but to force this education, force a good discussion. why did we score a 6? What are the opportunities that we have? This producer's in Martin County, Minnesota. They're not going to move all of their wean-to-market sites. But there are opportunities to change pig flow, to limit the number of sources, change the route in which we chore the barns, change whatever it is, right? There's a lot of opportunities that can be put in place. And so I have not had a bad conversation in any of these yet. I think it's motivating because wean-to-market biosecurity should not be something that is met with headwinds from those that we're trying to influence. It's just simply educating and trying to motivate an industry that frankly has a lot of room to make progress. So just in summary, as I wrap up here, a set standard provides a framework to establish common ground to practices and producers. Again, this is contrast to the sow farm. It provides that common language. It bodes well for an industry that can help align behind common practices that we know the education is there and the science is there. A complete data set and benchmark drives this curiosity. Producers at the end of the day, they like to know where they stand relative to peers. And this curiosity of how they perform relative to others does drive progress, and it influences accountability. Whether it's the site manager or the owner or what have you level, recognizes that there's clear gaps in what's actually happening, there is accountability that comes forward. It's a great opportunity to enhance with disease incidence and economics. Again, that's the part that I cannot wait to have, is can we tie economics and disease incidence to what these practices are actually happening in the field. I think that could be a very, very nice story if it can be done. There's a lot of work to do there. Progress is the goal, not perfection. That is the mantra that we have to keep saying. Because we can't achieve a perfect score, because we can't do everything on here, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything. And so making progress is very important. And then really just eventually we run out of excuses as an industry. We have the knowledge. We can educate. We have education, a lot of education in this room, in this conference, and we can influence. And by gosh, we should have motivation for foreign animal disease or just endemic disease in the United States. We should have all the motivation in the world to want to improve this. And so, again, to repeat Gordon's challenge the U.S. be the best in the world. This is one great step to let us go down that pathway of trying to improve, some clear opportunity. And I think everyone can recognize that we have opportunity to gain as an industry. So, Paul, with that, that's the update from me on this project.
Very good, thank you. Okay, he's done a great job because he's got 5 minutes left. So, do we have a question? Do we have a question, John? Yeah, I thought so. I thought you'd have a question. All right, here.
Yeah, so Adam, you said you hadn't weighted any of these risk factors yet. Will that happen? And if so, when and how?
When is a great question, John. I don't know. And you know my dad very well. He's been the one poking probably most incessantly on that you have to weight them. You can't treat everything as equal. What we've toyed with the concept is potentially running it as both, running it weighted and unweighted. I think as the data continues to progress and as we can hopefully tie in disease incidence, then the weighting may actually just fall in place. And so it may not be that we weight it before, we may wait till afterward and then weight the categories.
Adam, quick question. I was very nice data, by the way, as a starting point. And I wanted to know, in the sites that you surveyed, did you find wean-to-finish sites that they were showering? And the reason why I'm saying, or I'm curious about that, because on the US sheep, just high-level biosecurity, we found, or at least the responses at enrollment, it was a large number of sites have showered out of the wean-to-finish facilities. So I just was wondering whether you encountered similar situation. And then the other question, just since I have the mic, on the incidents, I would encourage you that you try to tie a project to start, even if it's small, to try to start measuring incidents, because I think that's what we need from the wean-to-finish side of things.
I love the challenge on the last one. I agree with you 100%. That's something that's definitely on the forefront is can we get disease incidents? The shower in, many sites have showers. Most of the sites don't use the showers is the short answer of that. The majority would use some sort of Danish entry, and that's a very, I would say, loosely held term. And so we've tried to be very disciplined in how we assess that it is a physical barrier and it's executed. And so those that are doing the assessment know the practices or have gone through the site or whatever it is, right? Or it's an assessment done that day when producers are going through, that we actually assess what's going on, not the red line that everybody walks over. It's actually a physical barrier, and that's within the standard, that it has to be a physical barrier for Danish entry with washing hands and changing clothes. The majority not showering.
But they have.
Many have showers, vast majority do not.
Thank you for your presentation. That's super interesting to me. Can you clarify who's actually completing that assessment? Is it you or leadership within Pipestone, or is it the farms or the farm managers themselves? And then on the flip side, who is actually in charge of providing that training for any of the animal caretakers? And then further steps, who's in charge of that audit, and what are they doing with that information, and who's delivering that information back to the farm?
It's a great question, set of questions. So the first one, yes, today the veterinary staff and a couple other individuals within the organization have been trained to assess in the exact same manner. That's been important for us to make sure the assessments are always conducted in the exact same manner. There's been a few larger organizations that we've worked with somebody within their operation that's a dedicated biosecurity manager or some level of leadership that will be unbiased and has gone through a training. But the majority has been done by our team. How is the information utilized? The producers have access to this benchmark at a regular basis that shows the aggregate, and then they would have their individual, which I didn't show here, but they would have their individual sites. So when they get the assessment back for their individual sites, they have each individual site where it breaks down within the categories, and then that review with whoever their, whether it's their veterinarian or whoever their leadership team is, to help direct whatever resources are necessary to further the training. So that could be done just right there, or it could be we're going to set up a program to help educate the team in a group setting or whatever it is to try and advance on this. And then most of the time it's in conjunction with we're going to set up a second assessment and we're going to go through this again and make sure that we're making progress.
Okay, one more.
Adam, great work. Keep it up. With regard to the mortality management, that was one, it looked like it had like 15% at the low risk, so a lot of opportunity. Just curious what's behind that with regard to rendering versus on-site. We had a really interesting conversation in the health certification breakout yesterday afternoon. JP Cano presented on the Sonora project and said, hey, no rendering except by certified renderers. And we look at the US SHIP database and we have 68% of the grow finish sites have rendering. So just curious what the makeup is of that mortality management in your biosecurity.
Yeah, good question, Tyler. So, and this project paralleled very well with JP's Sonora project. So, both projects move forward at the same time. It was great to bounce ideas off and try and recognize these similarities between the different countries here, US and Mexico. The two categories broken within mortality management is there a dedicated process on the site, i.e., right, mortality is removed, I shower out of the site, I take to the mortality box or whatever it is, or am I just walking straight out of the barn and dragging it to the compost or to the rendering site? And then the second one, what type of mortality removal do I use? So on-site on-site rendering would have been the highest risk. Off-site rendering or communal disposal, I have a common rendering box off-site, or I have a compost off-site that we take multiple sites to. That would have been the medium risk, and then low risk would have been on-site compost. And so, yes, you saw it right. There's a lot of high-risk behavior on the mortality movement, and I think it was both of them. I think it's the lack of process as well as there's just a tremendous amount of on-site rendering that happens.
Okay, very good. All right.